Mark, let's talk about Mariupol first, which Joe and I were just discussing. It hasn't been surrendered yet. If and when that day comes, how significant a moment will that be in this war?
Well, the valiant defense of Mariupol is coming to an end. The Russians have tightened their grip. They've isolated the remaining Ukrainian forces. I think it's only a matter of a couple of days. But the defense has been significant. It's inflicted a lot of casualties on the Russians. It has reinforced the conventional wisdom that cities soak up armies, and it bought time so that the Ukrainians have been able to conduct a successful defense in the north and then move forces to the east. On the downside, it's going to allow the Russians to free up some forces that will certainly push north. They will try to link up with other Russian forces that are pushing from the north down to the south, and there's a threat that they might be able to cut off the Ukrainian forces in the east, expand Russian territory in the Donbass. That's going to be the next great battle in this war.
And Mark, we heard from Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, who said the city basically doesn't exist anymore, that the Russian army has decided to raze it to the ground at any cost. Is this Russia's model now? Should we expect to see this in cities across the rest of Ukraine if and when Mariupol does fall to the Russians?
Well, there's no question that the Russians have used a great deal of firepower. That's according to their doctrine. They use a lot of firepower. They've got a lot of artillery. I think the one good thing is that the Russians have learned their lesson here. They've taken so many casualties in trying to capture the city. I don't think they're going to try this again. I think in the future they'll try to surround cities and go around them, not try to capture them. So I don't think you're going to see this level of destruction in other Ukrainian cities.
Okay, so we've talked about the fighting, Mark. What about any kind of potential end to the fighting? We heard President Zelensky say over the weekend that talks are at a dead end because they are not going to trade territory or people. Where do you put the odds of any kind of resolution through talks at this point?
Well, unfortunately, the prospects look very poor. Both sides are digging in on their positions. Putin hasn't indicated any willingness to fall back from his war aims. Zelensky had put an offer on the table at the very beginning to make Ukraine neutral and basically go back to where they were before, but neutral, give up their the possibility of joining NATO. But Putin didn't respond to that. So right now, both sides are far apart, and I don't think there's much chance of resolution. I think the war is going to go on for an extended period of time. You see that actually in the latest U.S. aid package. The United States is doing some things that indicate that the war may go on for weeks or even months, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about aid, Mark, since you brought it up. At this point, what does the West need to do for Ukraine? Is that aid needed in the form of weapons? Are we talking just straight financing at this point? What is your assessment?
Well, the latest aid package, I think, indicates where the aid program is going. We've been providing aid steadily at the rate of about $50 million a day, and I think you're going to see that continue. This current aid package will therefore last about 2 weeks, but it reflects a major expansion in what the United States is doing in two ways. First, it contains some Soviet-era equipment that we are getting from various allies and partners. We're doing that explicitly. The package has Mi-17 helicopters, but we're also providing T-72 tanks and I think likely MiG-29s and aircraft. But in even a larger expansion, we're providing U.S. equipment. We've never done that before. We provided some munitions, like javelins, which have been very important. But now we're providing howitzers and armored personnel carriers. Those are needed for the war in the east and the more open spaces there, and for the artillery to counter Russian artillery. But it also requires training for Ukrainian service members because these need maintenance, they need supplies, they're much more complicated. So there are Ukrainians training in the United States on how to use these weapons, and that's an expansion since we now have Ukrainian service members and the U.S. Directly involved.
And Mark, finally, to this point, there hasn't been any confirmable reports of the use of chemical or biological weapons in this war. The U.S. has promised a severe response to that if Russia would indeed use them. What would you guess that response would be when the president has committed to not actually directly putting American boots on the ground?
I think the United States is going to be in a very tough spot if that were to happen. We are providing protective gear in our aid package. And I think we'll do a lot more of that to mitigate the effects of chemical weapons. The problem is that that will, help military forces, but civilians will still be very vulnerable. The problem for the United States is that we don't have very many good tools. We're already doing probably about as much as we can. I mean, we could take a little more risk on the aid packages, but short of direct intervention, not clear what we could do with if the Russians use chemical weapons. So the one hopeful item is that to do that, they'd have to really get a battlefield effect. They'd have to use them massively. And, again, the pushback would be severe.